on Air. This is Sanya on Air. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to another amazing edition of Sanya on Air. I'm your host, Miss Sanya Hudson-Payne, and I have another celebrity guest interview lined up for you today. Before I tell you who's joining us on today's edition of Sanya on Air, let's just do a few quick housekeeping duties. Make sure you catch all Sanya on Air shows currently streaming on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Amazon Play, just every streaming platform that you can think of. And make sure that you hit that subscribe button as well. But like I promised you, I have another great celebrity guest. Joining me in just a few short seconds, I have actor Demetrius Grosse. Now, you've seen this amazing actor. He's currently starring in HBO's LoveCraft Country. Don't you just love that show? But I have a few questions about that show because I am all the way confused. And you can also catch him appearing in FX's Fear of the Walking Dead. So why don't we just get right to it and bring Demetrius Grosse live to Sanya on Air. Hi, Demetrius. How are you?
Hey, Sanya. Thank you for having me. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. I can't complain. I can't complain at all. Now, when I introduced you, I was telling my viewers and listeners that they can catch you on an episode on HBO's LoveCraft Country. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I helped kick off the series with the first episode. The reviews are really good. So, there's already some talk, knock on wood, of second season.
We need a second season because I'm still a little bit confused about the first.
People putting together the pieces of what are all the themes and plot points. It's very intricate, very, very sophisticated writing.
It is.
Yeah.
I watch every episode with my daughter, and it's like we need to pull out an encyclopedia to research the past, connect it to the present and the future. It's a lot. But tell us about your role on LoveCraft Country.
So the role I play is Marvin Baptiste. He's the brother of Journey's character, who is Letty Baptiste and Ruby Baptiste. And there's magic in this world, and then there's kind of like the real world that's happening in real time. My character, pretty much as it's been established, is in the real time, chronological events, and he's a journalist who is a sleuth for information and helps Tick, played by John Majors, and Letty and the Uncle George, played by the incomparable Courtney B. Vance. He helps them on their way to find Tick's father, and so I like the role because I get to serve a greater plot. Like this. My role in this, in the beginning of this, is very service. It's of service. I help to serve up the plot as opposed to it being all about me. And it's interesting playing that kind of an energy within a story. So I'm digging it.
Well, thank you for clarifying, because like I said, this is such an amazing show, but it has so many storylines, so many plots, and I'm glad that your character is kind of like assisting in the development of the main character's story plot.
Right.
I'm just all the way confused. So in a brief nutshell, can you just tell my viewers and listeners, what is LoveCraft Country about?
LoveCraft Country was based off of J.P. Lovecraft's novels. A lot of people have now realized and found out that he was a serial racist. And, what I thought was really provocative about telling this story is that, Misha and JJ and Jordan, they didn't allow the pain and the shame of the writer being bigoted. They didn't let that stop them from using the IP and creating a whole new world based off of that original story, but in a way that highlights Black people in these worlds that we're often not seen in, right? So worlds of where magic and and sorcery and the esoterics and just super well-read and like proletariat kind of energy, like you said, Sanya, like you had to look up some of the books or look at some of the references and some of the vocabulary that's being used. So I think it's an interesting a story that is really about Tick and his father, but it also goes into the backdrop of the 50s in America, and Uncle George and Hippolyta, played by Hippolyta is played by Ingenue Ellis, and they have the Green Book. So it's more thematically, in this first season, it was more thematically consistent than like having a linear plot.
Right.
Because I think the writers are very scrupulous to kind of get a lot of the information to bring us into the world in this first season. And then, I think things will clarify in terms of how all those moving pieces fit together.
Yeah, I think I'm going to clarify it by watching it all over again because you know how you can watch something for the second time and you just see something that you've never seen before. But I'm glad that you mentioned about the writer of the book, the author. I had no idea that the writer was a racist and a bigot, but it really explains the Black narrative, how we can take something that's traumatic and pull the joy from it and create a different narrative that kind of shed lights on all of our successes. So I'm going to research that a lot more, but let's just transition to your role.
I'm so sorry. I have about 15 minutes because I have to go pick my brother's birthday today. My brother and they left me to pick up the cake. But you know what? I'm going to go as long as I can go.
Please. I wanted to have you here for like 45 minutes.
Just because if we talk, I mean, it has to be the last time we talk.
All right now. So talk about your character on FX's Fear of the Walking Dead. Because I haven't seen that, and I am an avid television watcher, but I haven't seen that show. So talk about that character.
This is a fun character. His name has been a cause for conjecture. So I'm letting the fans out there speculate. Even what his name is. I know they know. Okay, so the beans have been spilled a little bit. He is a headhunter. He's coming for Lenny James's character, and that's all I can. Those are the only spoilers I will give. He's a loner and a pragmatist in this post-apocalyptic or zombie apocalypse world. It's in a space I've never ever got a chance to really play in. I wasn't really big on the gore shows, but this show, I realized it hits different because the show isn't really about the zombies. The show is about what happens to human psychology. When pressed to the limit. So the people that you have to worry about are not the zombies that are walking around like this. You have to worry about the people who are alive and the people who are strifeful for resources and who still have social challenges that we're dealing with today in real time. And so my character Emil, he is very aware of the fact that he is a Black man in this world, and he is a loner and he's a nasty dude. I don't want to give any more away, but I mean, nasty in the sense that like we might all become have this kind of psychology if we were in a zombie apocalypse where, the world was ending and flesh-eating zombies were terrorizing people. Then, what are those psychological corner turns that any of us would make? Those are the questions that I asked when approaching the character. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think people are going to dig it. So far, there's a little bit of interest in it. But honestly though, Sanya,
what?
that stuff is really cool. I'm really grateful. It's a blessing from the Most High God that I get to do. I get to like have a career that I love and share my art with the world. But honestly, it feels a little narcissistic to really talk about that stuff in the
Why?
sense of going on in the world right now. The bigger things that are really going on in the world, you know, other than whatever show I'm coming on or film I have coming out. And when we chat or when we were trading emails, I realized there were some questions that you asked that were, I felt even more poignant than, you know, where I trained or what was my biggest role. And I was so flattered, and I thought it was so thoughtful that you cared enough, or thought that your audience members would care enough to really wonder about, you know, what has been my comeuppance. But you
Yes.
know, I would like to us to, you know, chop it up and get into, you know, how these things correlate to what's really most important to our community and what's
Yeah.
also and to the broader community, and use our time there, because like you know, people can Google and see what I'm coming out on, but people might not be able to see you, Sanya Hudson Payne, and
Yeah.
Demetrius Grosse chop it up about everything from Justice Ginsburg to Breonna Taylor. I mean, we can really use this time to really go in. So if you're
Well,
about it, I'm about it.
I'm all for it. You know, I
I can't
wanted
promise I'm going to say anything, you know,
to. No,
landmark.
no. You
But I
have
would
my
love to
absolute
talk to you about
permission
that.
to say whatever you want to say. I just wanted to start the show as a point of reference so that people know where they can locate you after we transition
Sure.
into
Fair, yeah. It was
current
just on my heart. Yeah, I get that, and I respect that. It was just
topics.
on my heart. Like, it almost feels a little. It didn't even feel right to me for me to start talking about my own career in respect of these pivotal times that we're in.
Right.
And
So let's just get into it.
yeah, I mean, I would be
Right.
interested to hear what questions you had in terms of, you know, like how is the news, how is what's been going on, how has it provoked you as a journalist?
How has it provoked me as a journalist? It has really charged me or forced me to get more involved. And I put emphasis on the word more because I was always involved in the fight for justice. I've always been the type of person that gets into a lot of trouble because I speak up whenever I see injustices, especially when it's right in front of my face. So I'm always the one who gets into trouble. So when John Lewis mentioned that we should get
Good
into
trouble.
I was
Right.
like, oh my gosh, there's a term that describes the trajectory of my life. I've always been getting into good trouble. But I pose the same question to you as an actor. Now that we see this whole paradigm shift in inclusion and diversity, have you benefited from that in any capacity?
You know, benefit is an interesting word to use. I think I've been more aware recently of the importance for us to incorporate um, with one another um, as Black professionals,
Mhm.
and that that is one of those things that we've seen in history be very successful, and oftentimes get torn down by, you know, white supremacy structures and this and that. So like, you know, you go back to the Negro Leagues, or you go back to Black Broadway, or you go to Tulsa, Oklahoma with Black Wall Street, and you see communities getting it that it's our responsibility, and it's a joyful one once we take it on, to seek each other out, to look at each other as the creme de la creme, especially if the credentials line up and the proof is in the pudding. But to seek us, and to seek us in a way that is assertive and intentional to do business. That and to grow our narrative in terms of what our community is. That's been the biggest takeaway from me. So I don't know if I've benefited from, you know, any of the some very tragic things that have been happening, and even the evolutionary gradual change that's been taking place in terms of policy making, and shifts in power dynamics in Hollywood, I would say I've just gotten the memo very loud and clear that we have to find ways to work with each other, because every community does that, and
Yeah.
it's not with an energy of hate for other nationalities or other so-called races of people. It really has to do with our own love of ourselves and trusting each other and seeing greatness in what's possible when we work together.
Yeah, I love the idea of working together and also getting allies. And I don't just mean allies from, white folks. I'm looking at people of color like you're an ally as well. And if I have to force you or encourage you or teach you how to become an ally, that has become one of my daily charges. Just last week, I saw 8 police officers pull their guns out on an unarmed Black man simply because he made an illegal left turn on his Vespa. And I entered into a conversation with these 8 police officers. And my daughter, who is 24, I held her by the hand and I said, you have to witness and participate in this conversation as well, because
Mhm.
you may be on your foot one day. And I want you to know how to navigate through this time, which could maybe result in your life being lost. But you have to learn how to live your life unapologetically and also be an ally for someone else, which brings me
Absolutely.
to your children. You have small children. With
I
everything
do.
going on all over the news, I cannot turn on the news without seeing something happening. What are the conversations that you're having with your small children?
Well, it's interesting because during the protests, we were in LA, and I had to be very conscious of the threat of violence at some of the protests from some of the law enforcement who were, who were abusing power, and so I felt very in a bit of a crucible because while I wanted to protest more and be out there marching, um, I knew that my children would stand in could be standing in harm's way. So I realized that there's a lot of ways that we can carry our torches, so to speak. There's a lot of ways that we can do our march. So, like, my wife and I were saying that, you know, when we were going to like pitch meetings, so we were developing like projects and pitching and et cetera, and having to write these emails that are um, thoughtfully dispelling some systemic racism that still happens very, very much in our business. And we would just as a mantra, we would almost say to each other, look over and be like, "This is we're marching right now. This is our march." And so I say all that to say, there's a lot of ways that we can be proactive. Um, there's a lot of ways, and much respect to the men and women who are out there still to this day, um, marching and being that visible uh, evidence of our solidarity and our stance, right? But what I also got is that there's a lot of different ways that we can march and that um, we can provoke change. So
Yeah.
with my sons and my daughter, as you asked about my kids, that's where we're at with it. We are showing them that there is a responsibility to be excellent. You got to be twice as we were told you got to be twice as good as black people, as white people, and all those kinds of phrases. Well, where we lean towards is that nobody is better than your best,
Mm.
right? So be excellent. It for parents and for people who are not parents. I think this time it's a provocation for us all to stand up and just have more like accountability within ourselves and, like you said, within our families and how we're parenting. I'm sure your conversation is different with a 20-year-old daughter. My kids are young; they're 7, 5, 3. So it's like it's interesting translating the news,
Yeah.
keeping them abreast, but also um, didactically bringing it to a place where they can understand and it doesn't harm them
Right.
based on hate.
Right. And, I'm so glad that you mentioned that there are multiple ways that we can show evidence of being an ally for our own color. And I know that everyone isn't as assertive and as vocal as I am. And even in that experience with my daughter, after that experience ended, I had to pull her back aside and say, okay, I know this may not be your fit. So let's talk about ways that you can show that you're an ally, ways that you can show evidence. If it simply means talking to your girlfriends on the phone and saying, are you going to vote this year? How are you using your social media page? And I'm not saying every single post has to be socially conscious, but I want you to make sure that you're infusing some of this social awareness into your daily practices. So people just have to find an avenue that they feel really, really comfortable with, but somebody has to do something. Everyone is responsible for showing evidence.
Yeah, and Sanya, it's interesting because there's a blueprint for us. We literally stand on the shoulders of giants in regards to our ancestors and our forefathers. Like, as you mentioned, John Lewis, I got to watch the documentary on CNN about him the other day, and he was a giant. He was what, 5'6", but he was a giant. Limitations mean nothing when you have a heart after God and goodness. You know what I mean? Like it's just amazing to see how much of a warrior he was, in contrast to his, stature. Like it was amazing. I think I mentioned that because there is no. It's almost like a play. Like they say, there are no small parts, only small actors. Well, in this fight, or not in this fight, but in this move for social justice, for economic equity, for this move for law enforcement accountability, these moves, there are no small players. The person who, like you said, just tweets to vote, or who talks to their girlfriends or talks to their homeboys and is like, are you voting? Are you out? If you're out of town, do your absentee vote. Where we're making this big Leviathan kind of a problem. We're taking it apart in sections and pieces to whereas we obliterate it, but everybody has a part in it, and everybody's not swinging, the big lance,
right?
But people are finding their lanes, and I think that's an important thing, because when people feel like that their vote doesn't matter, or people feel like their voice doesn't matter, the things that they can do and that they are that they do have access to, they may not even tap in or lean into that because they feel like they can't affect the big monolith movements, but it happens. It can happen in small ways as well, especially with a united effort. And it's happening.
It is happening. It is happening. But I want to tie in this whole quest for equity with your life as an actor. There are so many millennials nowadays who are saying that they are seeing too many pictures or films about slavery.
Right.
How do you feel about that? Do you think that Hollywood has explored that narrative far too many times, or do you think that narrative is still needed so that future generations can know from whence we came?
Well, I think the narrative is not over explored, and I know that's going to be a controversial thing to say, but I think it is underdeveloped, and I think it needs to be told from the vantage point of like all the information that we've found out and that we've discovered about slavery since, right? So, okay, let me boil it down. There were Africans, Native Americans who were of African descent who were on this landmass before Columbus. before any of the so-called slave ships came over, there were
Mhm.
some that were here during slavery who were not slaves, i.e., the Maroons. You know, people often talk about the Maroons, but we don't go into the Maroons. Like maybe we
Right.
should develop a movie like that, so that we can have future generations know that, you know, Black people weren't just docile and allowing our women to be raped and pillaged and our men to be slaughtered and emasculated and dehumanized. Like there were revolutionaries in the midst of that. There were Moors on these ships that helped Christopher Columbus and these
Colonized.
colonizers get here. You know, we were master seamen. Our women literally and figuratively laid the tapestry of this country. So the Star Spangled Banner, the original sewing of that, what color was the woman you think who sewed that? You see what I'm saying? So like, I think no, I don't want to be ashamed of the slavery narrative because it happened. What I think is it needs to be evolved, and we need to talk more about the broader picture, who we were before slavery, who we were during, in and outside of the construct of slavery, and what that's left with us as, you know, some of us who are like 1 and 2 generations removed from it. Like I just found out the other day, my grandmother was a cotton sharecropper, and sharecropping is a boiled down term for indentured servitude. It is another boiled down term for a kind of slavery, you know. And I think when Ava comes out with the 13th Amendment and we all watch that documentary and we see how criminalization is another way of enslavement with the whole mass incarceration movement, it should incense us to get into some good trouble. You know, it
Yeah.
should galvanize that, wake up that thing in us to say, you know what, maybe I can do more. So I think these stories are they hurt, but it's important not to just put them away and blame on Hollywood for telling the same slave narrative. Let's mobilize and start expanding upon what, because it happened, right? Undeniably. Let's
Mhm.
start expanding our understanding and knowledge of more of who we are then and now.
I like that answer. I really do. But just talking more about enslavement, um, let's just talk about how the conversation from, let's say, past generations and the present generations when it comes to college has changed dramatically.
Hmm.
People now looking at college like it's some form of enslavement where you will be paying these exorbitant college loans for years and years and years, even after death. You are a graduate of an HBCU. Was that intentional, or was it because they had a great fine arts department so that you can explore and develop your acting skills? Let's talk about that.
Well, it was important to me to go to Howard because I always wanted to go to Howard. I literally grew up in the backyard of Howard University's campus. You know, like I'm a DC guy, so like, you know, my family's house was literally less than 5 minutes walking distance from the school. So I grew up in what we now know as the Mecca. You know, back in the days, Chuck D was shooting videos up there. You know, Biggie was at the Crampton Auditorium. I'm a kid, like running around this. You know, this is back in the day when Craig Mack and Flavor in Your Ear was popping, and Foxy and the Firm and Nas and Nature, and they was all that. You know, so I'm a kid running around working at the little stands. You know, working at the concession stands, but absorbing energy, sneaking in the classrooms. I think it's very important to go to to have the HBCU experience. The challenge was that it was in DC during the 80s and 90s at a time that's heralded. I don't need to go into it. You can Google that. But I had to get out of the city. And so I ended up going, I started at Carnegie Mellon, left, went to Howard for a couple semesters, which were pivotal times in my life where I got to see and experience Black intelligentsia with with savoir faire, you know, with je ne sais quoi, you know, and um, it was magnificent. I'm going to encourage my kids to have that experience. Hopefully, graduate one of the things I also, just in short, to answer even more succinctly your question, like I find that a lot of the super successful people that I see in business that are entrepreneurial, they come from the HBCU culture. There is a Booker T. Washington kind of an energy that is still the modus operandi in a lot of the these institutions. And by Booker T. Washington, I mean like just that up from slavery, pull yourself up out of bootstraps, you can do it yourself kind of mentality. And sometimes I felt like at some of the institutions I went to, I was getting trained, getting cultured, being educated to fit into a mold, basically to get a job. Whereas when I was at Howard, you know, I saw people creating theater companies, starting theater collectives, shooting their own films, industrializing, like creating their own merch, you know, and that to me is something that I think is still very unique to the historically Black college experience. That is something that people should be mindful of as we have to galvanize funds to keep a lot of some of these institutions, you know, as successful as they've been in the past. Like we have to realize that we burgeon out of our historically Black colleges, CEOs and vanguards of business. And of course, it's not to say that from predominantly, what they call them, PWIs, predominantly white institutions. It's not to say that from there, obviously, we don't have Fortune 500 company leaders and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's something keen in the Black college experience that really drives home for us the importance of being entrepreneurial and doing it ourselves. Every culture, Sanya, respects that. Like that's not like reverse racism or we hate whitey or some crazy idea. That's just us taking what we can do and incorporating with each other and building our community and building our industrial strength. Every other culture will respect that. I feel like the world is waiting on us, and we're all obviously seeing it happen more within our community. But yeah, I think, like you said, to be unapologetic about it is where I think we can move into, especially now.
Yeah. You mentioned so many great points. You know, for me, it's about taking care of home. Every other community, they do it. They come into our communities with nothing to offer to our community, but to take away from it. So it really starts at home. But in the cultivation of your excellence at an HBCU, did you not find it a responsibility to somehow, some way return back to DC so that you can pour back into your community?
Absolutely. Well, I'm here now, actually, and my cousin is he's an educator. So we are working on a way to do just that. Right now with COVID, it's interesting. Like a lot of my energies from, I'd say, I don't know, 8 in the morning to about 2:30 in the afternoon is spent homeschooling, or what do you call it, doing virtual learning with my C's. But we're trying to figure that out because he's Eric Bethel commandeers like 10 principals in like 3 different school districts. So he's got a big web. So we're trying to strategize ways to give back. I don't even like to say that give back, but to sow in to the youth and to because I do it a lot when I'm like on the road traveling for shows or whatever, like in LA, North Carolina, we've done workshops, but we're still brainstorming on how to crack the code to reach our youth in the midst of this pandemic. So it's something that we're tooling.
In my quest to be a continuous ally. I have one of my best friends. She is an educator out in DC. She is a principal, and she's been a principal in the DC schools for over 20 years, who is unapologetically bold, and she gets into a lot of trouble. And she's thinking of ways to pour back into her community. So you and I are going to talk offline, because I do want to connect you two, so that you can discuss how you two can kind of collaborate. And once again, just bring DC more things than it currently has, because it looks different now. It really, DC looks very, very different from the 80s and 90s. And we want to make sure that our culture, our children, don't get lost in this whole emergence of a color that does not look like us, nor the community that started DC. But you also talked about you being a parent in this whole virtual learning space. So as a parent, what can you give, what advice can you give to other parents as they're participating in their children's virtual learning?
Keep it fun. Also, it's important for you to realize that your day with your children is what you want to make it. That was a learning curve for us, because we have very rigid schedules, through Zoom and Zern and Lilo and all of these little apps, with all the links that you have to go through, and you want to push your kids, but you don't want to do stuff for them. You're still trying to make sure that they have a sort of sense of self-reliance. Is a big time for that. But when I say make your day your own, it's like, do those things with your family that, like, if you were running off to work, or you were dropping them off at school, you might not get a chance to do. So what does that look like? Maybe y'all get together and circle up in the morning and pray. Maybe in between class at recess, during that period, you guys take a walk. It's actually a cool time to lean in and tap in with each other. And of course, like anybody, familiarity breeds contempt. So you might have to go to y'all separate corners in the house, or wherever you are. But it's like, I'm just finding ways to get to know them better. Like, and also it's an opportunity to, like, observe your children.
Yeah.
Like what do they get excited about? And learning, here's a good one. Learning can take different, it can morph into different approaches, right? Like we made the other day, my son, he wanted to, he's infatuated with these laser cars. He's fascinated with laser cars. I think he's really he means, electric cars, that don't run on gasoline. So we went out, we got a whole bunch of cardboard, and let me show you. Hold on.
Okay. I love it.
Right. I don't know if you can see this. We made it out of pirate's booty.
Oh.
You see the back? Those are lights.
Wow.
Right.
Yes.
This is car. It looks crazy on the thing. So that might have been a little awkward, but
I love it.
The point is like it's an opportunity to be creative with your kids, because you are the principal now. Like, you are and while, like I said, there's schedules to keep, a lot of these things are pre-taped, so you can get creative with your schedule. And like, oh, they're learning about George Washington. Well, let's also learn about George Washington Carver.
Yeah.
Right. And just you're more keyed into what's really going on in these schools that we're sending our kids to. And so it's just an opportunity for us to get creative.
And your kids are small, and like I mentioned earlier, I have a young adult on my hands, but that doesn't mean that I'm finished parenting. And you mentioned something, just tapping in and making sure that you're present in your children's lives. So every day, she finishes class about 9:30. She's becoming certified to become a substance abuse counselor. But we go for a walk every single evening. And sometimes we talk, and sometimes it's absolute silence, because I'm giving her that space to just know mommy's right here, just in case you need to talk. So that's advice, for parents who have young adults, you've given parents advice if they have small children. So I'm hoping that they can take away from this. But I know that you have to pick up a birthday cake. I'm huge on birthdays because I celebrate mine for about 45 days. Who inspires you? Yeah, 45 days. Who inspires you?
Michelle Obama inspires me. I think Alonzo Mourning inspires me. My son, my daughter.
You can make it personal. Someone in your personal life, family.
Yeah. My father, you know, the man I know is my father. He raised me like I was his own. He transitioned about 7 years ago. But what inspired me about him was that he was just he was a salt of the earth guy. Like, he had been through some struggles in his youth, and he overcame them, and woke up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning to manage a catering company. Like, you know, and then when he didn't have work, he was at a cemetery, like, digging graves, right? Because he was making ends meet. Like, he was a blue collar guy, but he was progressive and hardworking. He taught me that I can always make something happen. So when it was snow in DC, he would take me to, like, shovel snow to make some extra money. Like, he left with me that you don't have to have a 747 to fly across water. You know what I mean? Like, you can row a boat and still get there. That's a big one for me. Just what you have in your grasp to make happen what you see in your vision, and utilizing that, which is tangible and immediate. That's a big part of his legacy that he left with me, and that's what that inspires me deeply. I think I just said Michelle Obama because I was just watching a documentary on her. I was like, wow. Who this woman? Like, we were just watching the Becoming thing. So I just recently watched it. That's why I came up. But if you're asking about somebody more personal than that, yeah, definitely my pops.
I love it. I love it.
My mother, of course, but that's almost cliche. I mean, my mother, you know, my parents.
No, it's not cliche. Some people out there, you know, who don't have strong relationships with their mothers. But once again, you know, what was a testament for me in what you just said. I have everything that I need, and I'm more than enough. You know, people are always looking for the 747, you know, to take them from point A to point B, instead of really understanding they are blessed with what they have and use what you have to take you to point A to point B to point Z. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. But earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned that you and your wife are pitching projects. In those pitches, can you just tell us what those pitches are about? Is it fiction, nonfiction? Is it in alignment with your social awareness? What are those pitches about?
You know, we're working in narrative, which is like screenplay kind of stuff, and we're also working in formatted shows, which is more like game shows, like Family Feud, or, you know, Let's Make a Deal, formatted shows as well. Our shows are very sensitive to the growing dimensions of our culture, right? So there was at one point where, like, if you were Afro punk, you were looked at as a certain way, right? Or if you were LGBTQ or something, you were looked at a certain way. If you were super pro Black, you were in this quadrant, and if you were more neutral, or if you were in an interracial relationship, you was in this. And we're trying to tell stories that show all of the spectrum of who we are, to create a cipher where we can get to that unity, you know. Yeah. And, you know, there was there's been all kind of stuff where, people say Black Lives Matter, and then there was a fight where people were saying all lives matter, and then there was another fight of like all Black Lives Matter, and it was all like inner sanctum like turmoil within our culture. The projects that we're working on are working to get us on a common ground of like, yo, we are in this together. It is not about us judging each other's like sometimes irrelevant orientations or dispositions, but it's like, where is the common thread here? Where do we identify as one? Where do we start that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And in creative ways and fun ways without being heavy-handed. That's what we're on right now.
I love it.
Because the more, you know what I mean, the more we find dissension and factions in our community, the further back we go. I mean, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before. Like, so we're trying to find ways to not homogenize and make everybody seem the same, but like find our common ground as a community, as Black people.
Yeah, I love it. And you mentioned a word that has now defined this whole experience for me, just talking about the Black experience. I'm going to equate it to a cipher, like a rap cipher. You have so many different rappers, spitting different bars. The tone, the rhythm may be different, but the cipher of the rap is still the same. So I'm glad that you are normalizing the multi-facets of our Black cipher.
Yes. Right? Yo, I mean, come on, because we have every spectrum of the human experience within us.
Yes.
The challenge is that in other cultures, you know what I'm saying, they're not separating themselves within it. It's like they're one. One of the big arguments is like, what is African American? Does African America have a nation? Well, the nation that's African America is American, right, because it was built by Africans. So it's like, with that being said, let's find where we can be unified psychologically first, because that's where we're still really breaking off a lot of our chains, so to speak.
I love it. Demetrius, thank you for this conversation and pivoting this conversation to these challenging times, because we need to define and strengthen and sustain and maintain these challenging times so that these messages don't get lost. I want to make sure that my viewers and my listeners can continue following you. What's your social media?
It's right down there what you see at the bottom of the screen, Demetrius Grosse. At Demetrius Grosse is my handle. I keep it pretty simple.
And that's on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, all across?
Twitter, yeah. Across. Facebook, I only really connect with people that I went to high school with on Facebook. Right? But like Instagram, Twitter, like, yeah.
Me too. I'm mostly on Instagram and Twitter.
Right?
For the brand, but
Facebook knows they have that lane. They know that. They know that.
Well, Demetrius, thank you so much for your time. You go ahead and pick up that birthday cake, and please eat 2 slices for me, because I love cake. And thank you so much for your intellectual capital. I feel honored and blessed.
Likewise, Sanya. Let's do it again. Take care of you and your daughter and everybody. Blessings to you. Bye-bye. Peace.
There you have it. I mean, let me tell you something. So with some celebrity guests, what the celebrity or their publicist will do is ask for questions in advance. And this is what Demetrius did. And I'm so happy that he had an opportunity to review my questions and say, you know what, can we kind of shift this conversation to something else? That's how I know the conversation will be authentic. That's how I know I'm going to get a lot of conversation from my guest. And like we both said, these are very pressing and challenging times for people of color. And we want to make sure that the equity that we deserve is seen and felt all across, not only the United States, but all across the world. That was an absolute amazing conversation, food for thought. I hope that at the conclusion of my conversation with Demetrius, that you walk away learning something. When he talked about his appearance, episode 1 of LoveCraft Country on HBO, I didn't even realize that the author of that book was a racist and a bigot. And when he was explaining that to me, it made me think of the use of the N-word, how where it started from a very, very negative place, and how people of color have redefined and reshaped that word to mean something positive. I was gonna say I don't use that word. I use it affectionately, with my friends sometimes, but I am kind of conditioning myself not to use that word at all. But it is about how our people own the narrative and we reshape it to mean what we want it to mean, even though other folk may have an ulterior motive. So make sure that you follow Demetrius Grosse on his Instagram and Twitter pages. Like we said, we don't really use Facebook. That is, my Facebook page is mostly for people that I know. My Sanya Hudson page. But make sure that you subscribe to all Sanya on Air streaming platforms on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Buzzsprout. And make sure that you follow my website as well, www.sanyaonair.com, to catch up on all past and future guests, and also find out how you can become an advertiser and a sponsor. I loved today's show. I loved today's conversation. I learned so much from my celebrity guests. This is what Sanya on Air, home of celebrity interviews, aim to do. I aim to unpack the celebrity. I want you to really get a glimpse of their inner lives, because they're human just like us. And what you may see on your television and film screens, what you may hear on the radio with their music, what you may read about in the magazines with their fashion and their beauty. These people are so multifaceted. And I want you to really explore their journey and their story, and not just applaud where they are and their success moments. So thank you so much for tuning in. And like I said, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. I'll be back next week with an all new edition of Sanya on Air. Take care, dolls. Smooches.